The police brought in the body of this 107-year-old Caucasian male, Jim Strong, from the location of Gold's Gym. The call came in for a man found at 3:27 a.m. with blunt force trauma to the head and chest area from a set of weights, and paramedics were unable to resuscitate at the scene. Not that they really wanted to.
The case was brought to our attention because the man was found in a fixed position, with limbs splayed in various directions, and the medical examiner would like our team to determine how this occurred and how to prevent this from happening to anyone else.
Team, we may have a serial killer on our hands.
To cause a muscle movement, the process begins with the brain. The brain sends the signal of movement through the nervous system and the appropriately named neurons. To signal movement to the specific muscle tissues, a specialized type of neuron called a motor neuron receives the signal in its dendrites to move the muscle. The signal that passes down the motor neuron is called an action potential and is the main way a human body will send any message within itself. Finally, the action potential has reached the end of the motor neuron, called the axon terminal, where it's time to send the signal off to the muscle. The signal will be sent in the form of little neurotransmitters that are contained in vesicles. The neurotransmitters, ready to leave their motor neuron and shoot off across the gaps between the motor neuron and muscle tissue called synapses to meet the receptors waiting on the other side. Now the signal has reached the muscle. The neurotransmitters have reached the new landscape of a myofibril, which combines with other myofibrils to make up a muscle fiber. The neurotransmitters meet the receptors of the sarcolemma, where another action potential continues the journey of its predecessor into the myofibril. But the action potential needs some direction. So it passes through the T-tubule to be guided to its next stage, the sarcomere. The sarcomere is a fundamental unit in the contraction muscle, so it is a very important structure to movement of the human body. At last, the action potential reaches the receptors of the sarcoplasmic reticulum. The sarcoplasmic reticulum controls the concentration of calcium ions, some of which will be released by the action potential when ATP energy is used to power the active transport of the calcium ions.
Meanwhile, the sarcomere awaits the arrival of the calcium ions so it can kick into action in the sliding filament model. The sarcomere is made up of two crucial myofilaments, actin, which is the thin filaments that have binding sites, for the myosin, which is the thick filaments with heads to link to the actin. Specifically, actin has two important passengers that are proteins called troponin and tropomyosin to regulate the binding sites of actin. Now that the action potential has signaled the release of calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum, the myosin and the actin are ready to interact. The calcium ions meet up with troponin molecules of the actin, causing the troponin to uncover the tropomyosin and its binding sites beneath. The myosin heads hydrolyze their ATP energy to ADP energy and the phosphate molecules in the conversion to the high energy configuration. Next, as the beginning of the cross bridge, the myosin heads move forward and connect with the binding sites of the tropomyosin. The connection between the myosin and the actin contracts, the sarcomere remains connected, therefore contracting the muscle, in the stage known as the low energy configuration. To close out the cross bridge, more ATP energy is used to break the bond between myosin heads and tropomyosin and relax the muscles again. The contraction and relaxation of the muscles will continue to occur as long as the sarcoplasmic reticulum releases the reused calcium ions, creating the cycle of muscle movement that powers the human body.
In the case of Jim Strong and any deceased body, rigor mortis has everything to do with the aforementioned process of muscle movement. When Jim Strong was not strong enough to lift his dumbbells and tragically dropped them on himself, the constant production of ATP in his body vanished, and so did some of the crucial steps in the sliding filament model. Jim Strong's body used its remaining stores of ATP to release the calcium necessary to begin muscle movement. But once the process reached
low energy configuration,
there was a critical error in the process. There was no remaining ATP to break the bond between the myosin heads and the tropomyosin to relax the muscles. So, his muscles remained in their fixed positions until his body was discovered. Our team has determined that, fortunately for the civilians of Woodbury, there was no serial killer activity in the death of Jim Strong. He died due to his weak chest muscles, which should be a crime on its own.
We've just been called in for another case. A 38-year-old Hispanic woman, Ana Garcia, was found deceased in her home last night, and it's up to us to figure out whether an infectious disease, diabetes, sickle cell disease, heart disease, or a sneeze killed our last victim.
Now that this case has been cracked open like the skull of Jim Strong,
Let's get back to the trucks and hit the road.